well as International Affairs Committee of the Senate, long time, and Frank and Keith Luce were the two power engines of steering, Senate policy on North Korea. And Frank has been to North Korea several times, and he has been willing, pushing for the idea of engagement with North Korea. Okay? I don't know whether that has been successful or not. But after he started, we all thought that he might become Assistant Secretary of State for Asia Pacific Affairs, but some strange person became the Assistant Secretary. Anyhow, you all know that he has been very close, confidant of Senator John Kerry. He has been very close observer of Korean affairs. And up until recently, he served as Senior Vice President of Amnesty International, covering Washington office, a poor-paying job. And he stepped down. Now he became President and CEO of Mansfield Foundation in Washington, D.C. Okay. In fact, Mansfield Foundation is mostly for Japan, okay, and therefore U.S.-Japan relations. But with the new leadership of Frank Janucci, I hope the Mansfield Foundation can extend its outreach to South Korea, North Korea, and China. Okay. Of course, he needs money, therefore. And the reason why he is serving here, we are paying very small in modest honorarium, but he's willing to come over here so that you guys can spread word on Mansfield Foundation and Frank Janucci. Okay. Anyhow, today, he'll be talking about, American policy on North Korea. Okay. The thrust of his argument, but let us listen to him and then let us agree with him. Okay. You'll have about 30 to 40 minutes. Since you are not using PPT, I'll give you 30 minutes, and then we'll have almost, an hour.
Perfect. I will try to take less time, but I really want to have the opportunity for discussion. But thank you. That's.
We have one more person, for Professor Cho, Mr. Cho from 동아일보.
안녕하세요.
Combination. Okay, voila.
Well, thank you so much, Chong-in. It's really my great pleasure to be here. As Chong-in said, I had a career of about 25 years in government. First 9 years at the State Department, where I was an intelligence analyst studying Northeast Asia. My focus at that time was on China and Korea, but also some work on Southeast Asia. And after 9 years at the State Department, I moved to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to work for Joe Biden.
Oh, Joe Biden.
First with Joe Biden.
And
so I worked with two very different people. Joe Biden and John Kerry are very different. So Joe Biden for 12 years and then Kerry for 3 years. And I was very fortunate to work for them because even though they are very different, what they share is that they are curious about the world. They want to learn about the world. And so I was able to be their advisor and to help them deepen their understanding, hopefully, of Northeast Asia. I was also present during the 2008 Obama campaign as Obama's Korea policy advisor. And so part of what I want to share with you this afternoon is what I think is the gap between the hopes and the aspirations of Obama in 2008 and the reality of Obama administration North Korea policy in 2014. And I think there's a very big gap. And I think part of it is the result of circumstances, especially North Korea's behavior. But I think part of it is the result of the Obama administration's loss of confidence in the value of diplomacy with the DPRK. So let me tell you a quick story. It's December 2008. Obama has been elected president. And for the first time, many members of his national security team began to get classified briefings about North Korea, right? Up until that time, his campaign people did not have access to all of the knowledge that the United States had about North Korea. I had knowledge because I was working in the Senate, but many people did not have knowledge. And I have to tell you that the more they learned, the more discouraged they became, right? And the fundamental point of discouragement was, can North Korea be trusted to implement any agreement about denuclearization? Or will they always cheat on the agreement? You have probably heard the expression, we're not going to buy the same horse twice. This is the most common expression used inside the Obama White House when it comes to North Korean negotiations. And this feeling stems from the idea that 20 years ago we had the agreed framework, right? And North Korea cheated on the agreement. This is the perception in the United States. And of course they did cheat, but it's more complicated than that. And then of course there was the 2005 September 19th joint statement. And again there was this pledge to denuclearize and a roadmap. And again North Korea would not fulfill their promises. And then there was the Leap Day agreement in 2012, right? And again, Obama felt betrayed, right? So you have this repetition of a feeling of betrayal by North Korea. Now, we can get into the details of that. You know it's more complicated. Both sides, in my view, sometimes fail to fulfill their commitments, right? But the perception in Washington is that North Korea has repeatedly broken solemn promises and commitments. So the origins of the strategic patience approach of the Obama administration, where they say that North Korea must prove through concrete actions their sincerity about denuclearization. The origins of that conservative, skeptical approach to engagement has to be put squarely at the feet of sort of this Obama administration perception of repeated betrayal. So we're not going to be fooled again. Now North Korea must prove their sincerity as a prerequisite, as a precondition for engagement. Now from where I sit, this policy is very wrong-headed. And it's especially wrong-headed because if you ask the administration today, do you believe that North Korea will abandon their nuclear weapons? They say, oh no, of course not. All right, but your policy is that until they take a concrete step to prove their willingness to abandon their nuclear weapons, you won't engage. That's right. So to me, it's a very disingenuous approach if you believe analytically that they won't give them up. But your entire policy is predicated on them taking concrete steps to prove that they will give them up, then you can predict the outcome of your policy, which is that they will fail to live up to your expectations, and you will simply wait. Now, waiting is not always a bad policy. The British, there are no British diplomats here today, but our British diplomatic friends coined a term called masterful inactivity. Right? So this is a very uniquely British idea, that there is a way to do nothing, but to do it gracefully, and to do nothing with great artistry, and to do nothing with great creativity. And by doing nothing, you're not really doing nothing. You are shaping the environment until the moment is right, when you have an opportunity for action. Right? So I think masterful inactivity has a place in diplomacy with North Korea. I think there are times when the United States is too eager to engage North Korea. For instance, after the 2006 nuclear test, when George Bush frantically dispatched Christopher Hill to Pyongyang to desperately try to get a deal, I think probably that was a mistake because it taught North Korea some of the wrong lessons. It basically taught them that only after a severe provocation will the United States engage. This was the lesson that I think North Korea internalized. But I don't think that what the Obama administration is doing today qualifies as masterful inactivity. I think the strategic patience approach of Obama today, I'm sorry to say, is really just a mask for inactivity. a kind of a benign neglect of the North Korea problem. Why do they do this? Two reasons. One is they have no confidence that diplomacy will yield meaningful results in terms of denuclearization. And the other reason is because they do not perceive that the risk of inaction is very high. From their perspective, North Korea already has fissile material. North Korea is already pursuing ballistic missile technology and will continue to. And so doing nothing does not incur any great risks for U.S. national security. This is the perception in Washington. So I think this perception is wrong on two counts. One is, let's talk first about, can diplomacy work? We're going over later today for a conference about the 20th anniversary of the Agreed Framework. Most people in Washington, in government, believe that the Agreed Framework was a failure, right? It was a failure because it failed to achieve either peace and security or denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. But looked at a different way, the Agreed Framework was a great success. For 8 years, North Korea did not produce 1 ounce of fissile material. For 8 years, there was no nuclear testing. For 8 years, there was no long-range ballistic missile testing. Most U.S. intelligence estimates, public estimates, from the time of 1994, said that by the end of the decade, North Korea might have enough fissile material for dozens of nuclear weapons if the program had been left unrestrained. But in fact, by 2002, their stockpile of fissile material was the same as it had been in 1994. Enough for maybe 1 or 2 nuclear weapons. Right? So was this really a failure? I mean, 8 years of diplomacy. It cost us some heavy fuel oil and some food aid. And in exchange, we bought 8 years of diplomatic opportunity, during which time, if the Clinton administration had been more engaged, and if they had a better partner in Seoul, there might have been real progress. So as we look at diplomacy now on North Korea, I think we have to set a more realistic objective than complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. I think that objective, for political reasons, will remain the long-term objective of the U.S. government and the ROK government and the Japanese government and the Chinese government. But for practical reasons, we need to look at that long-term objective as something to be accomplished in phases. And the first phase should be a freeze on the production of fissile material, a suspension of nuclear testing, a suspension of long-range missile testing, bringing the uranium enrichment program under international safeguards, and shutting down the 5-megawatt graphite-moderated plutonium reactor at Yongbyon. Could we accomplish those objectives through diplomacy? I think the answer is yes. I think that North Korea wants to sustain a small nuclear stockpile, or at least the appearance of a small nuclear deterrent. But I don't think North Korea has any particular strategic requirement to have dozens of nuclear weapons. I don't think that meaningfully enhances their security compared with having a small nuclear deterrent. Why? Because my assessment is that North Korea's nuclear program is essentially defensive. Yeah. It means that it is a guarantor for their regime. They don't want to be Libya. They don't want to be Iraq. They don't want to be on the receiving end of military action. They don't want to be on the receiving end of regime-threatening sanctions. So they want to have a coercive power, and they want to have a defensive power. It's almost like wearing a suicide jacket. If you come to get us, we will all go down together. Right? I could be wrong, but this is my assessment fundamentally of the purpose of their nuclear program. It's not because they think they're going to accomplish some sort of a nuclear first strike capability against the United States. So if that's true, then their fundamental security interests are not threatened by a freeze in their current program. Right? The reluctance of the U.S. to pursue that is not because the U.S. thinks that it is of no value. The reluctance, I think, is mostly political. The Obama administration knows that they would be savaged, fiercely criticized, if they sign any kind of an agreement with North Korea that allows North Korea to sustain for an indefinite period of time a limited nuclear capability, right? This would be viewed as a concession, viewed as appeasement, viewed as buying peace from an evil regime that is also guilty, as we know, of tremendous human rights abuses. But I still think that it's the job of diplomats to be pragmatic and to allow the current situation to continue with North Korea's unrestrained production of fissile material, unrestrained nuclear weapons development and missile development, to me is a big mistake. And it gets me to the second part about the threat. I can guarantee you that the moment that a road mobile North Korean ICBM is test fired and lands near Guam, the U.S. will wake up to this problem, right? I can promise you 1,000% that the current policy cannot be sustained the moment that that happens, right? And yet, there they sit in Washington. And maybe they're betting that they can't do it in 2 years, so it'll be someone else's problem. But there they sit in Washington doing virtually nothing about this problem, knowing that the current trajectory of the DPRK is that eventually, I can't tell you when, but eventually, and not 20 or 30 years, but maybe 3, 5, 7 years from now, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to test fire a road mobile solid fuel ICBM. It's going to land in the Pacific somewhere and demonstrate a capability to put a nuclear missile, onto CONUS, the continental United States. And then the President of the United States is going to pull out all the stops. There'll be diplomatic, there'll be high-level envoys, there'll be new UN sanctions, who knows? But I can promise you. So again, this gets to my second part of this equation. Why is the assessment of the risk so low? Partly it's wishful thinking. A lot of Democrats I know wish that we will retain control of the Senate in November. Right? Not going to happen. Republicans are going to take control of the Senate. But if you talk to any Democratic strategist today, they'll tell you, oh, no, it's okay. We're going to win Alaska. Kansas, something, we're going to win some, Louisiana, don't worry, it's going to be all right, we're going to have 50, and then Joe Biden will cast the tie-breaking vote. Like, no, Democrats are going to lose the Senate in November.
It's been.
There's wishful thinking, we'll talk about it more, but there's wishful thinking in the White House and in the Obama administration that somehow the North Korean problem will solve itself. Right, and this has been the fallback position of U.S. presidents probably for 30 years. That when you don't have a good policy, you take refuge in the hope that North Korea will collapse. Yeah, and I have to, I shouldn't be too critical, especially of friends of the Mansfield Foundation. Victor Cha is a good friend of mine, and he's a good friend of the Mansfield Foundation. But Victor Cha has, on occasion, we're on the record or off the record? What are we here?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I don't care.
That means on the record.
Because there's nobody here.
Don't quote me about Victor Cha. Victor Cha's microphone's right here. Victor Cha's a good friend. Victor Cha and I both have wanted to believe that the North Korean Juche system is fundamentally inconsistent with dynastic feudal succession, right? And there's a reason, in my view, why for 3 years you have not seen much discussion of Juche in Pyongyang. Why? Because it's irreconcilable with feudal dynastic succession. Now, maybe Kim Jong-un, you can justify, was a legitimate successor to his father, maybe, because for 20 years he served in top party positions and military positions and on the military commission, and he was groomed for leadership. So, like Little Shrub and Big Bush, you don't have to think that Papa Bush and Little Bush were part of a feudal dynasty, right? That they just happened to be smart politicians who got nominated by their parties and elected. So Kim Jong-un, plausibly, was a qualified successor.
You mean Kim Jong-il?
Excuse me, Kim Jong-il, thank you. Kim Jong-il was plausibly a qualified successor to Kim Jong-un. To Kim Il-sung. Switch generations. But Kim Jong-un is by no means a plausible qualified successor to his father. Right? So it belies to me one of the several of the core tenets of Juche, and there's an incoherence there. And this incoherence has led not just Victor, but a lot of smart people to say it can't last. Can't last. And so the White House is seduced by this argument, right? Because they don't have a good idea that will solve the problem. So they take refuge in a fantasy, which is that the problem will solve itself, and that North Korea will cease to exist, and it will collapse and dissolve, and then U.S. forces rush north to secure the nuclear material. China stays north of the Yalu River. South Korea welcomes 1 million North Korean refugees in its cities and stabilizes the situation in the north. And everything is hunky-dory, right? Right. So this is sort of the nice fantasy that the White House is living under, I think right now. And it gives them comfort when someone like me or someone else says, hey, I don't think your policy is working very well. A couple of final thoughts, and then we'll have a discussion. It's not as if the United States has been completely passive. All right? I want to say that Ambassador Davies, Kurt Campbell, now Danny Russell, who was just here in Seoul, all of these diplomats have been pretty active everywhere except with North Korea. So there's been an effort made to strengthen coordination and stabilize relationships and improve coordination on sanctions and other things. But if I have to hear one more time a U.S. senior official say that our policy is working because North Korea is more isolated today than ever, I'm going to remind them of the hearing that John Kerry held when he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Actually, it was a Joe Biden hearing. John Kerry was there. And Condoleezza Rice was testifying. Right? So this is years ago, after the collapse of the agreed framework. And before the September 19th joint statement, 2005. And Condoleezza Rice was testifying, and she said, Senators, I'm proud to report that our North Korea policy is more successful than ever because North Korea is more isolated today than ever. Right? This was 10 years ago. And I whispered in John Kerry's ear, I said, that's funny. I didn't know that our strategic objective was to isolate North Korea. I thought our goal was to convince them to abandon their nuclear weapons. And John Kerry asked the question of Condoleezza Rice because, again, diplomatic isolation or economic isolation, it's a tactic, right? It's not your end game strategy. The only reason the Obama administration wants to isolate North Korea is to put pressure on them to change their behavior. And I think around this table we have to make an honest assessment about whether isolation is working. I've not been to Pyongyang in 6 years. But people who have been there tell me the lights are on, food is available, cognac can be purchased, and is being purchased. There's traffic on the streets. People also tell me that life outside of Pyongyang hasn't changed. It hasn't improved. It's much the same as it was. I'm not sure that matters a whole hell of a lot, because the people who make the decisions in North Korea don't live outside of Pyongyang. Right? But is North Korea economically isolated today? Well, I would say that they have changed their economic profile from a diversified economic profile that included a lot of trade with Japan and Vietnam and South Korea and Thailand, and now it's mostly China. It's like 90% China. But their trade balance is up, not down. overall trade. Their investment balance is up, not down. So are they economically more isolated today? No, they're not. What about the sanctions on their military hardware? Have they been unable to acquire the necessary, very specialized, very hard to find components necessary to build advanced P2 uranium enrichment centrifuges? Maybe not everyone around the table knows how difficult some of these components are to acquire. You can't just go to your Radio Shack and purchase the things that you need to build these advanced centrifuges. But North Korea's done it. How? If sanctions are so effective, if they're so isolated. I can promise you they didn't build it all inside, right? They've gone onto the world market to acquire these things, and they've had no trouble doing so. So sanctions have failed to curtail their missile program, failed to curtail their uranium enrichment program, failed to cripple their economy. What about the diplomatic isolation? Are they really diplomatically isolated? Kang Suk-ju goes off to Europe, has a nice little charm school offensive. You know, Abe is flirting with the North Koreans over abductions. Pyong-soo comes here, Hwang Pyong-so comes here. Vice Foreign Minister appears at the United Nations, first time in 15 years, and answers allegations about human rights violations. That's very interesting. So I don't think they're that isolated. I think the policy is failing. And again, the purpose of isolation is to bring certain kinds of pressure to bear so as to change their behavior. It's not just to isolate them for the sake of isolation. So, you know, if you want to continue a policy designed to isolate the regime, you have to convince me that the pressure is building and the North is reaching that magical decision point where they're going to make a strategic decision to abandon their current path. I see no evidence of that. So, to wrap up, I mean, if I sound a little bit pessimistic, today is Friday. I should be more optimistic because one of my mentors, Bob Scalapino, I had a long discussion with him once about how he stayed so active and vital at age 84. He reminds me of Yi Heng-woo, who's always, you know, so strong and it doesn't matter, ageless. So Bob Scalapino, I asked him, I said, how do you do it? And he says, well, it's all about balance. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, on Monday and Wednesday and Friday, I'm an optimist. And on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I'm a pessimist. And on Sunday, I rest. So today's Friday, I should be more optimistic. And I will try to end on a more optimistic note. There is a new Korea policy team now in Washington. I would like to imagine, kind of like the Democrats holding the Senate, I would like to imagine that the new team might have some fresh ideas. And they might. But I don't think those new ideas will receive much of a hearing inside the administration unless one of those two things happens. Either there's a fundamental change in the assessment about whether or not the North can be trusted to implement a deal, or if there's a fundamental change in the risk assessment about doing nothing. I would have thought that the Syria nuclear power plant was enough of a wake-up call. You know, the one Israel bombed that was designed by the North Koreans and that the North Koreans were paid for. I would have thought that that was enough of a wake-up call about the risks of doing nothing. You know, that maybe the administration would have calculated that into their thinking about one of the risks that is left unaddressed by the failure of U.S. policy. But apparently not. So we have to wait for either a KN-08 test or for North Korea to dissolve and solve our problems for us, or for someone else to show political leadership on a pathway of engagement. And maybe one of the things you can help me understand is whether Park Geun-hye and her administration in their last couple of years may have an opportunity to set in motion anything with the North that could improve the situation. Finally, since I used to work for Amnesty, I've got to say something about human rights. And let me just say that, you know, I'm on the liberal side of the political spectrum. And a lot of my liberal friends for a long time argued that we shouldn't really raise human rights issues with the North because it would so offend them that it would shut down the prospects of dialogue. And I argued to the contrary, that, of course, they are sensitive issues, but the North has thick skin, and we talk to them about a lot of sensitive issues. And there's no reason why we can't talk to them about human rights. And I think that the events of the last few weeks prove my point. Because even though the North Koreans, of course, reject many of the allegations against them, they did not run away and hide. They sent their vice foreign minister to the UN to directly take on some of the allegations.
Foreign minister.
Excuse me, the foreign minister, not the vice foreign minister. The foreign minister. Thank you, thank you. And
I know the Lee Young-ho, vice foreign minister Lee Young-ho is your friend.
Well, you know that sometimes the vice minister is more important than the minister, but for protocol, the foreign minister is important. And the fact they also responded to the UPR in a more concrete way, specifically answering some of the recommendations that have been made about how to improve their human rights. I think for all of these reasons, I think it's very encouraging to me that it's possible to engage North Korea on human rights issues. And it may even be possible to make small incremental improvements in the human rights situation in the North through engagement. So I hope that in addition to talking about plutonium, we might be able to talk a little bit about the North Korean people, because I think a people-centered approach could shape the negotiating environment in a way that might help us get to the very difficult security issues. Let me stop there. Welcome your questions, thoughts, and your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go first.